Hello. Wow, it's good to see some familiar faces and a lot of new ones. So my name is Laura Congleton. I'm an entrepreneur. I work in the business development department at Fearless, and I run the innovation lab there. So it's a good place for someone to be an entrepreneur. Let's see. Sorry. There we go. So today, excuse me, I'm a bit nervous. It's been a while since I've been up on stage talking to anyone, so, but I married a risk taker. I'm a risk taker. We started a vineyard in Maryland, so if anyone gets tired of talking about data today, you can talk to us about what it's like to start up a vineyard. So I'm going to begin today with an overview of what I hope will help you get the most out of my talk today. So I'm honored to be speaking to people that are in positions of authority and budget, and control of products and projects and programs that are data related, and any scientist or researcher that is working in data products, projects, or programs. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it means for me to be a data influencer, what it means to the researchers and scientists that I work with, that work on data projects, and then at the end I'll talk a little bit about what we can do together to be good data influencers. That was the back button. This is the forward button. Okay. So we're all at DAX because we're trying to solve the same problem. There's a lot of data out there, too much for humans to handle, so we have to automate. And 3 years ago, I set out on a journey at Fearless with my team to look at how we wanted to ethically solve data problems. That meant we talked a lot about bias. So I'll probably talk a little bit about bias. But it was one of the things that we found that we wanted to address in an ethical way, but being able to address it meant setting up our projects and programs in a way where we could address bias. So it was clear to us that we had to figure out a way where, ahead of time, where the work that we wanted to do could actually be done, and there was a lot of influence involved with that. So what do I mean when I talk about influence? So it's trendy to talk about influencers these days. There's no denying that the influence behind social media comes with plenty of responsibilities. And if we borrow from this description of an influencer and tweak it just a little bit, it applies. So being a data influencer is about the authority, the spending decisions, the power to affect others with outputs of our work. So to me, even before the actual data work begins and we get started, people in data influencer positions directly affect all of this. So this is an example of a data orchestration pipeline. And at this level, the data team is making the data product that was defined and scoped beforehand. So before this work is deemed ready, there are two levels of influence that set up the parameters of this work. Decisions about how the tools and techniques and time and people that are allocated on steps like data procurement, data preparation and modeling impact everything at this level of influence. I call it the second level of influence because these float, everyone in here is an influencer too. But before we collect the data, before we explore it, and talk about things like model selection and training, this entire data life cycle has been influenced at the first level. And I feel this is one that's really important to talk about, and I personally take it very seriously because it's at this level that we decide if our work is set up for ethical and equitable outputs. So we directly impact everything at the second level. So, for example, at the first level, we decide based on proposals and quotes, ideas and investors, what we will be investing in. And I personally understand it can take a ton of time to normalize legacy data or to get to the point where you can even model with it. But maybe at the first level of influence, we didn't include that in the scope or the budget. Remember, I work in business development, so a lot of times I'm proposing work to the government. And this is a step that is important to provide enough time. So at the level of influence of BD or at the level of influence that I'm talking about today, we really can set these projects up, or the programs or the products up for a key component that maybe a data scientist really wants, which is to provide traceability in what's happening with his models. But if we don't provide the time and the effort to do that, we've influenced already what can actually get done at the second level of influence. So this is why I choose to spend my time and influence discussing 3 key ways that my team and I have discovered sets up the orchestration stage for inclusive and ethical and trustworthy ways to do AI. We call these 3 things data maturity assessments. I was so excited to see Pat and Justin talk about theirs for the Baltimore City. So I'm going to talk about the way we do ours, AIAs, and art. And I'll begin by describing the art that we talk about with our data work. So years ago, when my team started working on how we were going to do data work at Fearless, we landed on describing the values of our work with the acronym of ART. And it's always been something that I love that we landed on. I used to be a genetic engineer in a previous life. I've been using this quote since then. Da Vinci said it right. Art is a very good way to communicate complex topics to everyone, people that aren't SMEs or experts in what we do. So I'll start by saying art inspires the acronym I like, but we were actually trying to solve a problem. We were trying to look at really messy data, really ugly data. We were trying to talk about bias at Fearless. It's a very important part of the culture of our company to acknowledge how our designs are influencing those in our community. And we really just wanted to find a way to communicate about our values, and the acronym itself has a lot of meaning. So the A, basically it's us saying we're going to enter into a relationship with our customers by acknowledging that bias exists. Sometimes we'll call these features of influence because there's different types of biases, but in the reality is you cannot eliminate bias, you cannot get rid of it, you cannot fix it, you cannot solve it. So we're going to just talk about bias and acknowledge it. So this is just a lens. Art is a lens for which we have communications, and that's like the first thing that we'll talk about. And then once you acknowledge that it exists, the ramifications of that, we want to talk about what could potentially be impacted due to whatever biases we're finding in our data or in our models or whatever we are disclosing. And then the T, originally it stood for transparency, but we work with security level clearance data sometimes, so that T didn't resonate with everyone. But traceability does. So to a scientist or a researcher, being able to communicate in a traceable way how you made a decision or how you normalize something, it's very, very important. But we also call, there's 4 T's. The third would be trust. How are we going to trust the outputs and outcomes of our systems that we design? And we want to build them so they can be trusted. And all of this leads to transformation. So I found that when you work with customers that don't know, they know they want AI, but they're like really immature in their organizational level, you can help transform the organization while you're transforming the technology with them. So art is a mindset that is helpful to understand the factors that will influence the data product. For example, when site reliability engineers, delivery experts, or AI SMEs, design or product thinkers initially work together to bring the business and the user and the technology needs together. If they do so with the communication tool of art, the result ends up being at least a clear conversation about the ethical technical vision. And the mindset of art is also something we can influence when we solution before we even collect the data and explore it. So in order to have a technical vision that's transformational, the transformation begins with the data, not with the data, but with good design. Good design is all about putting people at the heart of decision making. Through the lens of art, our test engineers and our designers at Fearless, when we build an app or a pipeline or a data maturity plan, it's very helpful to meet the needs of the people that we are serving with our design. So all of this is describing when we infuse art into our work, which is pretty much throughout the whole data lifecycle. And next I'm going to talk about a key tool we use to influence everything that happens at the second level, which is the data maturity assessment. So I know Baltimore City, they're good data influencers. They do this. You'd be surprised how hard it is to get someone to buy this type of effort and work, because it takes some work. Data influencers can choose to invest resources in assessing their users and stakeholders at the organizational level, and we found that by addressing the potential for organizational data adoption workflows up front through these 6 key categories, then all of the stakeholders involved, not just the scientists, not just the engineers or the product people, but at the business level, everyone's getting oriented around where the organizational level is. So analytics, reporting, quality, management, usage, governance. We feel that if we can figure out if you're in like a basic stage where there's no governance, or maybe you're in exploring how to even think about analytics, if we can figure out where you're at as an organization in relation to what you're asking us to do, we can help build you a path to get to where you want to go. So when influencers address the workforce platform and the digital platform together, automation has a chance at a trustworthy path to production for something like governance. And I know Pat and Justin talked about that earlier today, but the data maturity assessment is a very important tool that allows a team that's trying to solve a government problem to communicate the why behind the approach that we're using to solve their data problems. So here I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk to you about data influence in practice. I think in a couple sessions from now, the DoD gets up here and we talk about defense. But DoD is I go after business with DoD all the time, and they're very influential in how I propose work. They release these ethical principles for creating artificial intelligence. And without this, like every proposal I put together, even if it's not for the DoD, I use these principles. It's very influential in thinking about the approach of how you want to do the work. Unlike some data influencers who know how deeply their algorithms influence society but have problems reining that responsibility in. So when art was created, it was around the same time that Google fired their ethics team, and I know my team that shook them to the core, just part of the problem solving that we did when we came up with art. Apple Pay is another example of maybe that could have been helped by something like art or data maturity assessment. When they first released their into production Apple Pay, I think it was biased against women for their loans. They were like smaller than the men loans. And I don't know if that was the right or wrong decision. I'm just saying the traceability, the transparency, it might have been helpful for Apple to be a little bit more communicative about why that happened. And even AI researchers that are calling for labor laws and protections means that I think their first level of influencers aren't taking seriously the responsibility that the second level influencers are asking for. This is a good example. So full disclosure, I'm super biased for Paravision. I work with them. They're really cool facial recognition technology. And they're the best at what they do because they chose to approach data procurement in a pretty unique way. Not sure how many people here are aware of how most facial recognition technologies works. They use public data sets. So typically a bunch of movie stars are used to train their algorithms. And they didn't ask those movie stars permission. So when Paravision set up their proprietary databases, they did it a different way. They actually went to sports arenas all over the world, so they got like normal faces and got their express permission. They went to sporting events like soccer matches, fed them pizza, and they built up a really cool database that they use to this day. Recently, a couple weeks ago, they won the Department of Homeland Security 2021 Tech Rally, 100% matching across the board. Most facial recognition ends up somewhere around the 60 to 50% range, so I think their influence, their approach to their data set is their differentiator and why they have like a #1 standard out there. All right, I'll shift here a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about the second level of influence, starting with the data scientists and researchers. I know there's some that I work with in the audience, and they know me well. I care deeply about setting them up for success. And what that means to me is it's a field where many different types of experts have to work together. People that know how to store data, people know how to extract meaning from data using math, people that need to tell the data story and help direct the product or the outcome that's trying to be achieved. These are typically different people. I mean, every once in a while you run into a unicorn and it's all in one person. And that's special, and that happens. But an influencer at the first level, when I'm proposing business, if I budget for more than one person, that's setting up a team for good success. And all of these individuals are always trying to work together to solve data problems, looking at the data, transforming it, and while working with the data influencers for decisions about what needs to happen. But the most important step in this whole cycle is clear communication. And this is why I'm sure y'all have seen this graphic in one way, shape, or form. But the point of it is to get to desired outcomes and outputs of solving our data problems. Sometimes it can feel like a moving target to a scientist or a researcher if we fail to set out on solving the problem without a clear lens and communication like art, or really knowing where the organization is at maturely. And here is a big factor of why. So bias. At the second level of influence, bias comes to play. There's about 180 defined cognitive biases that interfere with how we process data and think critically about it. And this is just 6 of them. But at this level of influence, it's impossible to fix. And so the only way to kind of handle the bias that is present when we're doing our work throughout the data lifecycle is to remember some of the T's in the art. Provide traceability and transparency. So for example, for researchers trying to do some user research to make a product, a data product, and they only get 4 or a handful of people that they can research with, they might come to a false consensus. Well, if there's no way for the researcher to say, I only had a very small data set, maybe I need more time or more people to do some user research with, I got a false consensus. It's just a way to communicate some of the factors that might be influencing the outputs of the initial research, and maybe there's a way to ask for more time, more budget. So how do you do that? So we've talked about why we do this, we've talked about when, but how do you investigate bias? That was a big question for my team. I think it still remains a big question for my team, and I'd say at this point we've probably tried 5 or 6 times with actual government customers to do what I'm about to describe. But we're going to talk about the algorithm now and a motivation for assessing it. So this is one of the 3 key things I said that we found that sets up data products for success and a path for trustworthy AI. So an AIA. So algorithmic impact assessments. These are tools that we discovered Canada was doing. It's pretty cool stuff, and it's mandatory. It's every 6 months, and the results are open to the public. And I feel like this is stellar first-level influence. And I won't go too deep into the methods, but I will say that their work is accessible and adaptable to any data domain or product. And I think the slides will be shared so you can click on them and go right to the databases and repositories where things are at and learn a little bit more about how Canada does it. But it is performed like a risk assessment tool. So there's an impact score, a mitigation score, and then an overall score that is produced. And they take that score, and it's used to indicate a level of potential impact. So remember, this is this is Canada, so this is all government data. So they're assessing it, massive amounts of data, and if they're getting an impact score that's in the 50 to 100% range, people that are in position to have decisions need to see this, and they have a clear path to that. So based on the score that you get, you can see what decision maker or influencers need to review the algorithm. Next, I'm going to tell you about how we adapted it for a use case with one of our government customers. Time is a bias. If you build your models and you put in 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, it really affects the outputs. So we were creating a supply chain management tool for a customer. We were working years on this. And we noticed the analysts were not using it. They were reverting to their spreadsheets. So that was right around the time we found the Canadian method, and we adapted it to create an AIA visualization guide and walk them through how we were creating the algorithms, the parameters we were putting into it, and we came up with the parameter of time. For supply chain decisions, if you go from a week to a month or a year, that really affects the ordering and all the components of the supply chain system. So basically, the analyst asked us to change the time parameter. They became aware of the limitations or what that time parameter was doing, and then they started using the automation. So it was a true success story on just having a clear way of communicating with analysts about how we create our algorithms that led them to adopt the thing we'd spent years making. When data influencers like myself get the approval and the funding to scope the frequent investigations of our automated systems, we found at minimum the AIA discussions happen. These are really important questions. If it's not compulsory like Canada, then what's the motivation to assess algorithms? Who decides what counts as an impact? Who conducts the assessments? Of course, our designers and our researchers and our scientists are working with analysts, but it's really helpful to have other stakeholders involved in the discussions as well. So the AIA is really another form of communication, just like art, just like data maturity, but it really does, these three tools set up the stage for what I think is the most important part of data work, which is crystal clear communication. This leads me to the final portion of my talk, which is how we can be good data influencers. So influence is something that's really important to building trustworthy systems. At its core, it can inspire the scientists and the researchers that are working on things, that they have a clear path for help if they need it. And it's really a sign that we're taking seriously the outcomes and outputs of our work. So as a data influencer, I'm committed to championing things like art and data maturity assessments, maybe even scope and budget the work for preparing our data well. I think that's something I've seen that everyone wishes could happen fast. But I know if I can bake that into a schedule of delivery where we have plenty of time to work with horrible, ugly, legacy, bad data, we're not rushing, the systems are built better. Next, publications. I think I found a lot of resources online for what bias is and how bias is in our work, but how to address it. I don't think that is, there's not a lot out there. We've written some articles. We'd love to co-author with anyone, so please, if anyone's looking for publications, we've got about 4 ready to go and looking to collaborate with folks. So I think just building on the literature is something we can do as influencers. And then finally, art. So we came up with art as a way to communicate because we didn't see a way out there in the literature to communicate our values. So I challenge any influencer that is in a position like I was with my team, that if we see a gap, just fill it, invent something new, create something new, describe something in a different way, and then talk about it. All right, so what does a data influencer mean to me? It's the number one word is responsibility. There's a responsibility that comes with creating the business, describing the work, budgeting for the work, staffing the work. Being a good data influencer sets up everything on a path for success. And that does, for the scientists and the researchers working on the programs, being a good influencer, I think, involves transparency and traceability and good communication. So setting up our researchers and scientists to have that is good influence. And then what can we do about it? I hope at least one of the things I mentioned in the previous slide is of interest or helpful. But before I go, I definitely want to talk about my circle of influence. Not last, because last but not least, but this is every single person I've worked with over the last 3 years to come up with the ideas I put forth today. And that's all the customers I've worked with their problems and use cases and data sets. So I would not have the awareness or the understanding or propose business or be working on new projects right now that didn't have these things in it if it wasn't for all of these folks. So I want to thank all of them. Wow, I talked really fast because that's... So we have tons of time for questions, if there are any. If people don't want to get up on the microphone, I don't know if anyone's used Slido before, but it's super easy. You go to slido.com, you type in the number, and you can, for the next week, ask me a question or leave me a comment. And with that, this is all my information. Is another way to get a hold of me too. But I'll leave the Slido up. Okay, that's it.